Since January of 1973, Roe versus Wade and its companion case, Doe versus Bolton, legalized abortion, denied any protections to the unborn. And that's been the case for the last 50 years until very recently, when a Supreme Court case, very well known now, Dobbs versus Jackson, changed everything in the American legal political landscape about abortion. Things are different now than they were for the past 5 decades. That said, there's a lot of confusion out there about Dobbs versus Jackson. And Dr. Anderson, I'm wondering if you could just take a moment to explain to us what the Dobbs case said and maybe more importantly, exactly what it didn't say.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, first thing to say is that the Dobbs case is the culmination of 50 years of faithful laboring by the pro-life movement.
Praise God.
People like Nellie Gray, who didn't accept Roe v. Wade as the truth about the Constitution, or even more importantly, the truth about unborn human beings, who organized that first March for Life on the 1-year anniversary, and then for 49 years thereafter, every January 22nd or thereabout,
That's right.
in the middle of the brutal cold, frequently freezing, snowy weather, they're marching for life to remind America and to show the Supreme Court that they got it wrong. And Dobbs is the culmination of that. And so one thing just to say immediately is, like, you and I are of a younger generation. We should be very grateful for the people who came before us, who didn't live to get to see this day, who did the hard work that made Dobbs possible. Now, what does Dobbs do? Is the Supreme Court admits we got Roe wrong. We got Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which upheld Roe 20 years later. We got it wrong. There's nothing in the U.S. Constitution that protects a right to choose lethal violence in the womb, right? And I pause there because people want to say, oh, the Constitution protects the right to choose. Choose what? Finish the sentence. Our Constitution, whether you're talking about a privacy right or a liberty right or equality right, all of our liberties have limits. And one of those bright line limits is you can't kill an innocent human being.
Right. There are clearly things that you can't choose.
Can't choose to do. Yeah. And what Dobbs does is it says Roe and Casey got this wrong because they claimed that either as a privacy or a liberty matter, that the Constitution protected the right to choose to kill an unborn child. Now, what Dobbs doesn't do on its own, it does not protect a single unborn baby. Right. So, and that's not what Mississippi, the state that was, defending its pro-life law, was asking the court to do. The state was simply asking, allow us through the democratic process to enact legislation to protect unborn babies. We've been hit by a lower court ruling that says Roe and Casey Constitution prevents us from protecting unborn babies. Get this bad Supreme Court ruling out of the way so that the states and the federal government can start enacting laws protecting babies. So what Dobbs does is it gets rid of the bad ruling, but it doesn't on its own protect children. There's more work to be done.
That's right. It's almost as if now, as we go into the post Roe versus Wade reality in our country, it's almost like the work begins now. For the longest time, we could not advance pro-life legislation. We sort of outlawed from doing so. The democratic process when it comes to abortion couldn't function. And I think that right there is one of the most toxic things about Roe versus Wade. That Roe versus Wade didn't allow the democratic process to function on this issue. It's sort of closed conversation. Can you say a little bit about that?
I mean, what was happening up, in 1960s, 1970s, states were enacting pro-life laws. Unfortunately, some states were starting to water down and weaken those laws. That we were having a national discussion. We were having a state-by-state discussion about unborn human life, about the dignity of unborn human life. We were also having, some bad ideological currents coming out of the sexual revolution that were saying, look, consenting adults should do with their bodies whatever consenting adults want to do with their bodies. Contraception had been constitutionally kind of legalized in the Griswold decision a decade prior. And I think abortion was very much then kind of the backstop.
That's right.
So you start seeing the pushing for abortion. What Roe does is, one, it silences, cuts shorts all of those discussions. Yeah. But then two, it radicalizes the politics surrounding abortion. Because now you had to have one political party go all in defending Roe. And so what we've seen is that there were pro-life politicians who grew in office. They evolved on this issue in office from being very solidly pro-life to being, I'm personally opposed to abortion, but I'm
Right.
politically for choice. Like that's obviously
Yep.
the Mario Cuomo line from the address he gave at the University of Notre Dame. To now you actually see, Catholic politicians saying that, it's my Catholic faith that inspires my abortion activism, that,
Wow.
it's why I think a woman has a right to choose, et cetera, et cetera. I think this has been terrible, one, for those elected officials. They are placing their eternal souls at risk simply for temporal partisan gain.
Right.
We should all be concerned about that because first and foremost, we should be concerned with everyone's salvation. But then second, as citizens, it's alienated pro-life citizens from one of the two major political parties.
Right.
And then it's allowed the other political party to take us for granted,
Yeah.
pay lip service to us. And so one of the possibilities of Dobbs is that we could work so that a decade from now, 2 decades from now, neither of our two major political parties are committed to injustice.
Right.
And then the political choice we have is not between a party that's committed to injustice and a party that might be bad on other issues, but it's at least good on this one, or at least pays lip services. But now we could say, all right, which of the two political parties best prudentially implements Catholic social thought, best prudentially is going to arrive at the goals that we're all agreed on, right? We don't have parties rejecting the principles. We have parties disagreeing about how best to apply the principles. That would be a much better political, cultural place to be at. Dobbs now creates the possibility for some of that political reform to take place.
Yeah, there's actually a shot at more healthy, reasoned political conversation. And at this stage in history, it may not be the case yet, but there's more reason to hope than there was 7-8 months ago that someday there might be vibrantly pro-life politicians on both sides of the aisle. And so then
the way there once was. I mean, that's the important thing to remember.
Whereas after Roe versus Wade, very systematically, any pro-life politician on the left side of the aisle was silenced and edged out of the party. Now what you have is the possibility of a more healthy political dialogue. Okay, well, that's exciting. There's yet another reason why the Dobbs decision is such a gift to not only to unborn life, but to American politics. Where do we go now?
Yeah.
So things have radically changed. As long as I have been alive, and most of the people watching this video have been alive, Roe has been the conversation stopper in American politics. Now that we can speak again and have reasoned conversation, what do you think are the most leveraged places for the pro-life movement to go?
Sure. I mean, I think the simplest way to think about this is that we should reject false dichotomies.
That's right.
Frequently, especially from a Catholic perspective, heresy is when you latch onto one to the exclusion of the other.
That's right.
Jesus is either man or he's both, fully man, fully God.
Yes.
We're either saved by faith or works, both faith and works, et cetera, et cetera. Here, a series of false dichotomies that we should reject. People will say, look, should we focus on the culture or focus on the law? And the answer is both. We need people doing cultural reform, cultural service to women. We also need people doing legal reform. Should we focus on the states or on the federal government? Both. We need good federal laws because unfortunately states like California, New York, Illinois, Massachusetts, they're going to be pretty bad on this if we just leave it to the states. We're going to need some federal and some state legislation. We're going to need both legislation and executive actions. The next pro-life presidential administration, there's a lot that now can be done through executive orders, through agency regulations, et cetera, et cetera. We need to respond both to those who are doing the killing, right? We need to have laws that prohibit lethal violence in the womb. We also need public policies that will allow more women to choose life, right? We need public policies that will be supporting mothers. Texas prohibited abortion after the heartbeat bill, got lots of media attention. Texas also enacted the Texas Alternatives to Abortion program. Wow. They allocated $100 million to that program, and the media ignored it. But what this shows is that we can do both. And then the last thing I'll say is there are material reasons that people seek abortion. They don't think they can afford to have a child. They don't know, where am I going to live? What are we going to eat? And there are pregnancy resource centers, Sisters of Life, lots of great groups geared towards addressing those material needs. And there's public policy that can address that. There are also ideological reasons. There are bad understandings of human sexuality, bad understandings of autonomy, bad understandings of what human flourishing looks like. And this is actually where I think some of the focus missionaries are so well positioned, is that the ultimate defense of life is going to be not just Evangelium Vitae, also theology of the body. We have to respond to the totality of the sexual revolution, which means responding to 50 years of bad ideology that's undergird the abortion license.
So, Dr. Anderson, it seems as though we have a fight on many fronts. But what I would like to encourage all of our viewers to do today is to throw your weight into the cause. And whether it's politics at the federal level, the state level, the local level, whether it's volunteering or putting your finances into a crisis pregnancy center, whether it's getting involved in producing materials or advancing materials that counter the toxic effects of the sexual revolution, throw your weight into the pro-life movement now, because the work begins now in a post-Roe America. We are Focused, the Fellowship of Catholic University Students. This has been another installment in our Love Life series, and we here at Focus are excited to walk with all of you, both in parishes and also on college campuses, as we walk into this exciting time of post-Roe America to build the culture of life. Thank you.